When I married Daniel, I knew that I was gaining not only a husband, but also a family. He grew up in Boston while I came from Dallas. After our wedding, we moved to Chicago for Daniel's job. It was a fresh start, a new chapter, but it also meant leaving behind my parents and stepping into a new family dynamic. Daniel's mother, Margaret, had been widowed for nearly 5 years. She lived alone in a modest 2-story home in a quiet neighborhood in Boston. Daniel was her only child, and though she had friends and neighbors who cared about her, loneliness had become a heavy shadow in her life. When Daniel suggested that his mother move in with us in Chicago, I hesitated. I worried about space, privacy, and whether I would ever feel like the lady of the house. But then I thought about my own mother. What if she were alone, sitting at the kitchen table with no one to talk to? That thought softened my heart, and I agreed. We prepared the guest room for Margaret, filling it with fresh flowers and family photos. When she arrived, I saw the mix of excitement and apprehension in her eyes. She hugged Daniel tightly, then turned to me with a gentle smile. "Thank you for having me here, Claire," she said softly. Her words were simple, but the weight of them stayed with me. At first, living together felt like learning a new dance. Margaret had her habits: early morning coffee at 6 a.m., reading the newspaper front to back before speaking a word, humming old church hymns while cooking. I had mine: late-night tea, watching crime dramas on Netflix, and cooking with spices she rarely used. There were small clashes. Once, she gently suggested that I didn't need to put so much garlic in the pasta sauce. Another time, I caught myself feeling slightly irritated when she refolded the towels I had already folded. But beneath those tiny frictions, I sensed something deeper. Margaret didn't want to feel like a guest. She wanted to feel like she belonged. And slowly, she did. One evening, after Daniel had left for a business trip, Margaret and I found ourselves sitting at the kitchen table together. The house felt unusually quiet, and I could see the loneliness flickering in her eyes again. "I don't like being alone," she admitted. "After your father-in-law passed, the silence became unbearable. I would turn on the TV just to hear another voice in the house." I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "I don't like being alone either," I confessed. "When Daniel's gone, this house feels too big. Maybe we can keep each other company." That night, instead of retreating to our separate rooms, we stayed in the living room, talking until nearly midnight. Margaret shared stories of her youth in Boston, how she met her husband at a church picnic, the time Daniel was born during a blizzard, the way her kitchen once smelled of cinnamon rolls every Sunday morning. Her stories painted pictures of a world I hadn't known, but one that I was grateful to step into. From then on, our bond deepened. We started cooking together. Margaret showed me how to bake her famous apple pie, her hands moving with the practiced grace of years. I taught her how to make my spicy chicken stew, and though she fanned her mouth dramatically at the heat, she laughed and asked for seconds. We went on walks in the park. Her pace slow but steady, her voice steady as she shared wisdom I didn't know I needed. She reminded me that marriage wasn't about perfection, but about patience and small daily acts of kindness. On weekends, we would sit on the porch with mugs of tea, watching the world go by. Sometimes we spoke, sometimes we didn't. But the silence no longer felt empty. It felt like companionship. One rainy afternoon, when the skies were gray and the streets shimmered with water, Margaret knocked gently on my door. "Claire," she said, her voice a little shaky, "can I tell you something?" "Of course," I said, setting aside the book I was reading. She sat beside me, her eyes searching mine. "I was so afraid when I moved here. I thought you might see me as a burden. I thought I might get in the way of your marriage. But you've made me feel like I have a home again, and I don't feel so alone anymore." I felt a lump rise in my throat. I hugged her tightly as though to say, "You belong here. Your family." That night, when Daniel returned, he found us both in the kitchen, flour on our hands, laughter spilling through the house. He paused in the doorway, smiling at the sight. "You two look like you've been up to something," he teased. "We've been baking," Margaret announced proudly. "And talking. And maybe laughing a little too much." Daniel shook his head, grinning. "I've never seen both of you so happy." And he was right. Weeks turned into months, and what once felt like a careful balancing act became natural. Margaret and I no longer thought of ourselves as in-laws. We were simply two women who needed each other, who filled the silence in each other's lives with warmth, laughter, and love. I realized something important during that time. Family isn't just about blood or names on a family tree. It's about showing up for each other, about making space in your heart for someone else, about realizing that sometimes we all just need a hand to hold. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky pink and gold, Margaret turned to me and said, "I used to dread the nights, the loneliness, the quiet, but now I look forward to tomorrow. And that's because of you." Tears welled in my eyes, but they were happy tears. Because in helping her feel less alone, I had discovered something too. I wasn't alone either. And in that truth, in that shared companionship, our little family grew stronger than I ever could have imagined.